Hi, everyone. My name is Christine, and I'm a product designer at the browser company. As the name implies, we're working on building a browser. I'm currently heads down building our new mobile browser named Dia. But prior to this, I spent the last year working on Arc Search, our mobile browser. Now, this is not my first rodeo. In the last 12 years or so of my career, I've been primarily focused on mobile apps, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I've designed mobile apps for companies like Facebook, WhatsApp, Deliveroo, and multiple smaller startups. And throughout all these years, like I'm sure so many of you in this room, have spent a lot of time wondering, what makes a really, really well-designed mobile app? And how can we design better apps? How can I do better? How can I evolve my craft and design better experiences? How can I make apps with rich animation and motion, with full accessibility support, apps that are creative and groundbreaking, and with efficient development processes to boot, letting us ship quickly? It sounds like a pipe dream, right? Well, I think I have a proposal. But first, to understand where I'm coming from, let's take a look at the design of some highly regarded apps today. If I ask my designer friends, they might tell me one of these: Flighty, a beautiful app for tracking your flights across the past, present, and future. Or Family, a crypto wallet that makes the concept seem approachable and friendly. Or Noicast, a beautifully simple podcast app. Now, what do all of these have in common? They're all iOS apps. They're beautiful iOS apps that feel native to the platform, but they're iOS apps nonetheless. Flighty themselves say that using iOS-forward design has been really key to their success. But I usually need to design for Android too. So what if we look at some of the famous cross-platform apps instead? What can we learn from them? So seeing here side by side iOS apps and Android apps from some of the biggest ones out there today, what's interesting to me, looking at these, is that they all look the same. It appears that what makes people love the first couple of apps that I showed, how they embrace the platform's visual language, how they feel native and a part of the OS, fresh, colorful, and bold, it gets lost once you try to go cross-platform. Now, is that to say that in order to design an app that supports both iOS and Android, you need to eliminate the magic that makes apps good? I don't think that's the case. But what is then the secret to designing beautiful cross-platform apps in a way that's even better for both you and your team and your users? What if you want those rich animations, the faster development, improved accessibility, and the creative challenges? This is my humble proposal, the one simple trick. Go native. Try and embrace the actual platform's design language. And this actually isn't a new concept. We used to do this. If we look back at the early days of mobile, there were actually major differences between apps on iOS and Android. While still cohesive, apps deviated in both patterns and visuals. When I joined Facebook back in 2013, we had very separate teams for iOS and Android. I was on the Search for iOS app, and a totally different designer with a different TM, PM, and a different roadmap worked on Android search. Then, I think over the next couple of years, there were two big things that happened. When React Native came out in 2015, and it spawned this dream of cross-platform design. I think the hope was that soon we would all just have one team of engineers building one app for all users. And at the same time, the growth of design systems with dedicated teams creating these beautiful component libraries. It just coincided perfectly with this. New design tools like Figma made the whole process easier. And all of a sudden, we went from designing rectangles in Photoshop and Sketch to working with these elegant Lego pieces. So I think that combined, this was a force of nature. It was this promise of a much more rapid development process. And it seemed inevitable that very soon, we'd all be working in teams that looked like this. No delineation, just everyone shipping one product to all users. But if we skip ahead 10 years, for most companies, we've instead got teams that look like this. Design systems made it easier to have one designer supporting multiple platforms, but yet we've still got separate code bases, separate engineers. It turns out that for many companies, React Native couldn't quite replace the native code base. Some found it wasn't performant enough, or it led to too much context switching for engineers. Some teams even look like this today. At some large organizations like Meta and Uber, you use React Native a lot, but it didn't replace the native code base. It actually just added another platform to support. And if you're not Meta or Uber, this is just not always going to be feasible. I personally found that on a team like this, I'm actually spending far more time redlining and discussing implementation trade-offs than I am actually designing. And the engineers are building everything from scratch. So where do we go from there? Well, likely, you already have native engineers on your team. And this isn't a problem. This is actually an opportunity. If we're working with the constraints of totally separate code bases, can we embrace that instead of trying to design it away? I mean, we're going to have to spend more time designing, but if you ask me, that's actually the fun part. So let's recap quickly. Let's say that there are two different ways to approach designing for multiple platforms. One, you've got platform agnostic, where the UI design is the same across all platforms, regardless of the device that it sits on. And on the flip side, you have platform native, where the UI adheres to its system. So we've already looked at examples of this, but here's another fun one. The Google apps, they kind of look more like Android apps than iOS apps, but they're still homogenized. If you're an iOS user, you might actually have strong opinions about this, about how it feels on your device, a little bit foreign, a little bit out of place. This is what Android users experience with so many more apps. Now, let's look at platform native. I think WhatsApp is actually a great example of a product that embraces the native platform standards. The app looks significantly different across iOS and Android and other platforms, too. And when you break it down, you see that the search bars are different, the tab bars are different. The primary action button has moved from the top right to being a floating action button instead. But it's still recognizably WhatsApp. Yet these small tweaks make all of the difference. But I can hear what you're thinking. Isn't this actually a lot more work? Isn't it a less consistent experience for users? So I want to take you through a couple of common myths. One, the familiarity myth, that having one design across multiple platforms is easier for users. The thing is, I think users only care about their own platform. They're not comparing your iOS app to your Android app. They're comparing your Android app to every other app on their phone. And if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't behave the way that they're expecting, they'll notice that. I think that if you want your app to feel like a utility, something that's equally as essential as the calendar app or the camera app on my phone, then cross-platform actually becomes quite counterintuitive. Second, the efficiency myth, that it's faster to use the same design across multiple platforms. This can be true, admittedly, especially at scale, for very large organizations with dedicated design systems teams that are just producing these beautiful components, building them for you as a centralized service, it kind of makes sense. In this case, the pains of maintaining that system gets abstracted away from product teams, and they get to just focus on shipping features as quickly as possible. But for many smaller teams, this is just not the case. Instead, I often find that trying to adapt a custom UI to 2 platforms feels a bit like swimming upstream. You're hacking the SDK components to look and behave in ways that they weren't meant to. Or you're building from scratch and losing all the benefits of the existing components and doing a lot of additional work. So lastly, the brand myth, that custom UI is the best way to let the brand shine. Now, I don't think that designing natively means looking like the settings app. There's several levels to this, and great creative ways to still let your brand shine through, and I'll touch on this in a moment. But in that case, what does it mean, then, to go more native? Well, I think it means being more pragmatic. Why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? Why invest your resources in trying to replicate an iOS-esque tab bar on Android when the stock one will solve all of the same user problems much more efficiently? I also think it's more accessible. Material Design and the UIKit SDKs provide built-in support for so many accessibility features, for dark mode, for responsive widths and sizes. So rather than reinventing these standard elements, you'll get your dynamic font size and your high contrast and your colorblind support, voiceover and tablet support, all without even thinking about it. Because these features so rarely make it onto the roadmap, despite how important they are for users. I think it also means being more useful, your app feeling like a utility. Like I said, with Flighty, it's a gorgeous app, and the design language makes it feel like it should have come bundled with your phone. When you use it, it feels like a given that it should be there, like no different than Find My Friends or the calculator even. You find you can't live without it, and all of a sudden it's Apple who's to blame for making you pay a subscription rather than the company itself. It's also more future-proof. As of right now, this moment, none of us really know what iOS 19 is going to look like. But I'm sure that in a couple of weeks, we'll be rushing to update our apps to match the latest visual language. Adopting these new styles is so much easier when you're relying on the native SDK rather than having to retrofit it into your own custom components. This lets your app age more gracefully. I think that revolutionary custom UIs can look really cool in the moment, but easily age so much more quickly as the trends change. And lastly, more creative. This might seem counterintuitive, but hear me out. I find that my creativity thrives under constraints. I have more fun trying to design solutions that adhere to the design language of the platform than I do designing in a total vacuum. So here's my hope today, that some of you in this room, the next time that you have to design an app across multiple platforms, you'll consider taking a native platform approach. I think it will save you and your engineers time, and it will make users much happier. And I think it's easier than you think. So without further ado, let's look at what this means in practice. First, I want to note that design patterns really aren't as different as they used to be. If I was given this talk 8 years ago, I might mention the criminal sin of using a bottom bar on Android or a floating action button on iOS. But I think as an industry, some patterns have just come to transcend platforms. It's also important to remember that it's not all or nothing. Again, we're really not trying to design the settings app here. Brand creativity and unique graphics are allowed. You know, it's a spectrum, and you might be aiming somewhere around the middle. So instead, think about how small tweaks can make a big impact. Think about things that differ between the platforms, even on a small visual level. Like, how on iOS it's fun to go crazy with the background blurs, whereas on Android, perhaps I want to think a little bit more about solid colors rather than these materials. Or the shadows. I love using a big gratuitous grab shadow on iOS, making album art glow or things pop. But on Android, I find it's best reserved for elements that are floating and give an elevation. And then there's the shapes. We all love a good rounded rectangle, but I find that on Android, we have a bit more freedom. Play around with fat, rounded corners, fun shapes, and even just the basic table rows can be a bit more round and fun. So I wanted to share some examples of how we apply these principles in designing arc search. First, we had this voice search feature on iOS, and it relied really heavily on these gradient effects and blurs and materials. I knew that this wouldn't feel at home on Android. So instead, we came up with an alternate approach that still embodies the same spirit as the original. So using flat, overlapping colors instead, we're still able to inject this arc search brand without it feeling out of place on its platform. We also had this pretty straightforward toggle on iOS that lets you switch between our AI search and Google. This felt like an opportunity to do something more fun on Android. Instead, playing here with the fluidity of material design, making up for that lack of drop shadow and the flatness by instead injecting it using the shapes and making it feel almost like it's being squeezed across. And Android's embracing of fun shapes felt like a great match for the Arc logo as a widget, because while on iOS we're constrained within these rectangular frames, Android gives you more room to break boundaries. So similarly, we'd originally built the tab switcher on iOS to mirror that of the app switcher. So then rather than porting it directly over as this, we thought, what does the app switcher look like on Android? Can we make the carousel look like that instead? And just applying this across the board, you end up with small differentiating features in everything from the onboarding flow and across the app. I think it can be so much fun to work with native patterns. If we needed the design of every feature to work across both platforms, we couldn't have designed Call Arc the way we did. A fun voice-based AI that mimics your phone's call screen, making it look like you're on the phone with Arc. So to wrap it up, here are my 3 quick steps to get started. First, audit your app. Think about the principles that I shared earlier and see if there are small opportunities to adapt to a native UI instead. This can just be things like your tab bar or the position of your primary action button. Even small tweaks make a big difference. And I find this easier if you study the documentation. I really cannot sing the praises enough of Apple's human interface guidelines and Google's material design guidelines. They're thorough pieces of writing that I think that really any designer can pull knowledge and inspiration from. And lastly, lean on the SDK where possible. Be pragmatic about it. Before you design something that's totally custom, ask yourself, like, what impact is this going to have? Is it worth the trade-off of the development time? How can we style what we get for free out of the box to serve our needs, rather than inventing something new where it makes sense to do so? It might be the better use of your engineer's time. Because I think that when we let iOS be iOS and Android be Android, everybody wins. And I think that as designers, we have the power to advocate for this platform-respectful design. So don't settle for a one-size-fits-all. And if you embrace each platform's strengths, you can create truly memorable experiences. And you might even have fun doing it. Thanks, everyone.